Hello, I'm Professor Bill Nelson, and today we're going to be talking about some of the different shapes and how we test items in the matrix. We're talking about energetic medicine. Energetic medicine was formulated originally by Dr. Voll and some of the other doctors, and they found a phenomena that they called medication testing. The basic idea that everything that exists would have an electrical type of shape around it, some type of energetic field created by the electrons, protons, etc. Their organization of structure would lend to it a type of signature or a specific shape. So thereby they started putting things onto a grid, and they were able to see electrical changes in the body, how the person reacted, what we have deemed a type of evoked potential, an electro-evoked potential. In other words, trying to find out how the body reacts to things. Because the human body, as any organism, is a reactive substance. Now, as this phenomena started to grow and started to be used around the world in different types of things, most of it in the beginning was all centered around the point probe. They had a one-channel resistance device that they applied to different acupuncture points on the fingers, etc. And they would do this, and they would get an electrical signal, which was a type of resistance, skin resistance. In order to get skin resistance, they'd have to challenge it with a current. They would get one electrical reading, 1 per second, and then they would check to see if there was changes made. Voll had discovered a type of phenomena, that the body was reactive, as is every being. The science of this electroreaction goes back into the ideas of the shark. And what they had found out is that the shark was able to have a very, very powerful, the most powerful electroreactive field known. The shark could sense changes in an electrical pull, which would be equivalent to having a 1.5 volt battery over a mile away from its source. The shark had an incredible field, and this is how he was able to find his prey, how he was able to find his food, is that when a fish would start to swim and was wounded, it would create a different type of electrical field that the shark would be able to detect. There was a phenomena in the shark's nose, in his nasal pharynx, which allowed him to detect the shape.
In the meantime, I'd love to know more about how the hammerheads find this spot. Scientists are working on one idea that may just give us a clue. While we're using all of these instruments here to find our way, the sharks are navigating backwards and forwards from the sea mountains in strong currents and often total darkness with none of our technology. That's one really clever trick, and there are plenty of scientists who are starting to think that that has to do with their sixth sense. That sense is an electromagnetic one. The bottom of the ocean is shaped by features of solid rock, hidden by deep and often cloudy water. But the magnetism in these rocks can form invisible ridges and pathways. So could the hammerheads be able to sense these magnetic landmarks? It's a very exciting theory. So while I wait for the Sea of Cortez to clear, I'm going to see some convincing evidence for that idea. Just how sensitive the hammerhead's sixth sense really is. I'm in Hawaii at Coconut Island, and I'm with Steve Kajura, and he's developed a really interesting experiment on how hammerhead sharks orient. Steve, can you tell us a bit about it?
All organisms in seawater give off an electric current, an electric aura around their body, and the sharks are able to detect this electric field and orient to it. So even if a prey item is, say, buried under the sand and you can't see it or smell it, the sharks can still detect the electric field and orient and dig it up and eat it, like a stingray or a
sole or a flounder,
whatever,
or something,
something like that.
All sharks are attracted to the weak electromagnetic fields of their prey, but it's thought that the hammerhead's extra-wide head shape gives it an especially sensitive detector. To find out just how sensitive, Steve is using electric currents to create these fields and see what field strength they can detect. The circle of cable on the left has a current running through it, while the one on the right has none at all. How minor is this current we're talking about, this current that you're putting in here?
Right.
How minor is that?
What I'm applying right now is 7.7 microamps, 5 nanovolts per centimeter, 5 billionths of a volt per centimeter.
It's an incredibly small figure.
The way to think about that would be to take a standard flashlight battery and stick one lead in the water in Boston and the other lead in the water in Miami. And a shark swimming directly between those two leads would be able to detect that minute amount of current flowing between those two leads.
Just a little torch battery.
That's right, that's right.
And that's about 1,500 kilometres or so.
Right, with that, yeah. It's tiny.
That's amazing.
Even though they look identical, the target on the left attracts all the shark's attention. So Steve knows they're not attracted by visual cues, just a tiny magnetic field.
There.
Look at that. Beautiful.
So that's the electric current. So he's coming down, he was biting that just then. So he's picking up that incredibly small electrical current and having a bite at it. And the other one on the other side's a control. There's no electrical current coming through that at all.
That's correct.
So if a baby hammerhead's magnetic sense is so finely tuned, then maybe the adults use magnetic landmarks to find their way hundreds of miles to hidden meeting places like El Bajo. Shh. And there they are. Wow, there must be 30 or 40 animals in that school. If the theory is correct, El Bajo is a magnetic beacon for them all to gather at every year. Females outnumber the males in these schools by about 6 to 1, and that's a big difference. And the scientists are just beginning to understand what's going on here. The theory is that the females circle for a few months every year to attract the attention of a mate. I can just make out some scars on the fins of some of the larger ones. That's where a male's latched on with his teeth during the act of mating. Thankfully, the female's skin on their fins is especially thickened to protect against these love bites. But there are nowhere near as many sharks here as there were last year. And statistical information tends to suggest that there's been a massive population decline. It's a real area of concern. I've finally seen El Bajo's legendary hammerhead school on the last dive of the last day.
Upon further study, we found out that every organism also has this reactive field and reacts to it. It's part of its process of trying to find ways to be attracted to its nutrition and being repelled from toxins. This was one of the basic ideas of life, is that people needed to be reactive. And of course everybody is, every cell is, every bacteria. We'll notice that bacteria in a field will be drawn towards north or south depending on the type of bacteria. And that homing pigeons are able to fly many different directions and find their ways home after thousands of miles. But a simple little refrigerator magnet put on top of their head, and they can't do it anymore. We find that there is an electromagnetic field theory around elements of different things.
Science.
In 2009, the United Nations said around 4 billion people had a mobile phone. That's more than half of the world's population. Now a new study from the American National Institute of Health shows mobile phones can produce a noticeable reaction in the brain that researchers are trying to understand. 47 participants had mobiles strapped to each side of the head. One phone was activated, but on mute, the other was turned off completely. After nearly an hour, the guinea pigs were scanned. The image on the left shows what happened when the mobile phone was turned on. Active brain areas showed up in red. The upper part, the area closest to the aerial, shows an increase in brain activity of around 7%. The image on the right shows the same subject, but with the mobile turned off. Researchers believe it shows the human brain is in some way sensitive to the phone's electromagnetic waves.
We have a responsibility to investigate whether there are or there are not long-lasting consequences from repeated stimulation after 5 or 10 years of cell phone exposure.
This is a study that is interesting and will almost certainly provoke additional studies.
Okay.
It's not the first study into mobile phone usage on the human brain. For years, researchers looked into mobile usage and cancer, but the results have been inconclusive. Experts say this new study might offer the first real step in the search for an answer.
Fluid, which is black.
But even if the reaction proves not to be harmful, some researchers are taking no chances.
I confess that after the findings, I changed my behavior. So now I use it on a speakerphone. I just put a wire on my earphone.
Now we're going to talk about getting into the idea of measuring the reactive field of these different substances. So let's talk about a very simple substance known as salt. Here we are inside a salt crystal. And salt is a sodium and a chlorine. We see the sodium, we see the chlorine. And one has an electron that the other needs. Basic ideas of chemistry. We'll take a look at the simple Mendeleev table, and we see all the different factors of all the different chemicals and how they fall in line. And this gives us an idea, because this allows us to start to understand the quantum phenomena of the electrons and protons that make up these elements, along with the neutrons and other different particles as well. But when one of them wants a couple of electrons to fill its field, to fill its valent quantum field, it is drawn towards another. And this is how life starts to generate. Life starts to generate through the development of these items that start to get into contact. And this is where chemistry starts to develop and all this other things. Now we see that salt will always organize itself when in a crystal, will always organize itself in this cube fashion, the salt cube that we're in right now. Every time we have salt and we put it and we get this little salt cubes, we're going to see that there's little cubes of salt. No matter how many tiny times we break it up, there's still smaller and smaller cubes. This is the organization pattern. If we drop the salt into the water, it dissociates from its crystal, and then it still holds that type of shape, as that shape is now imparted into the water molecules. Water is a polar substance. It has a north and south pole. It's a very, very weak magnetic field, but it has a magnetic field. This magnetic field allows water to attain and to grab a type of crystal. In fact, water at temperatures between 0, because below 0, water is a solid, 0 degrees Celsius, and when up until 100 degrees, at 100 degrees, water becomes a gas, becomes steam. And in the middle, we're going to see that water is a liquid. But water is a polar liquid and is a liquid crystal between temperatures of 0 and 60 degrees Celsius. Beyond 60 degrees Celsius, we'll find that water loses its ability. Hahnemann found that homeopathy was destroyed. Why? Because we had lost the liquid crystal effect of the water. Losing that, we would lose its memory or its shape memory. So we're talking about shapes. Everything has a shape. Now let's go, and here we are in the human tongue. Here we are, and inside the human tongue here, we have shape receptors. You can see all the little shape receptors. These shape receptors allow us to taste. Taste also takes place in the nose, as taste and smell are very much akin. These are done through shape receptors. Salt has a type of shape, a type of flavor, a type of taste. That is because the little key of the salt goes into an exchange process, a little lock, and this physical shape of the key and the physical shape of the lock allows the two to combine and triggers the brain into receiving. That is salt. That is sweet. That tastes like a pepper. That's coffee. Because these substances, these so-called dead substances, they're not living, we're talking about the coffee, the salt, etc., they have a stagnant or steady shape. That shape is not changing. It changes a little bit, has a little bit of change, but pretty much it's stagnant. That's why when we taste the coffee, it's coffee. If we taste it later, it still has the same flavor. If it starts to change its molecular structure, it will start to change its shape. Say the coffee spoils or something. So now, we wanted to try to find out about these shapes. All of this process, all of the processes that we're talking about in medication testing were all about three-dimensional, at minimum, three-dimensional shapes. There is no way to describe this in a single dimension of a single frequency. That was a failure. Energetic medicine started getting into the ideas of single frequencies, but single frequencies cannot describe these three-dimensional shapes. So I had come along some 30 years ago and started working on machinery to try to find out about the shapes. One of the things we did in order to get to these shapes, we started freezing. So in around 1984, 1985, I started working on this idea. Some of the initial work we did, we published it in the International Journal of the Medical Science of Homeopathy. It was 1997, almost 10 years ago. And the work was done 20 years ago. We started freezing the homeopathics. And once that salt would get, and that's sodium chlorine, that's a simple nat mur according to homeopathy, and that type of shape, that cubic type shape, could then be imparted, and even if we started making it more and more dilute through the process of succussion, that energy would be given and the water would start to remember the shape. So even if we got past a 23x, where we now no longer had hardly any of the salt, in fact, once we get to about a 30x, it's extremely improbable that there's any of those salt molecules left. Even if we do that, the shape is still there. The shape is there in the water. Very interesting. So then hereby we had proven homeopathy through shape and by freezing the crystals. We started studying the electrical nature of that shape, also in the journal. We started developing machines that were going to be able to look at the magnetic resonance, the capacitance, the conductive resonance. Because what we found is that from basic science of electronics, there was an idea that reflected three dimensions. The right-hand rule of electronics is as an electron moves like my thumb, a magnetic field is generated at 90 degrees and an electrostatic field is generated at 90 degrees, giving us a three-dimensional area. This is reflected in the relationship of capacitance and inductance as well, and can be very simply outlined as we showed in our initial journal, that there was indeed a three-dimensional shape in all of these items, no matter what it was. Whenever the two atoms would get together, that's a simple molecule like salt, and of course we take something like serotonin, where there's 256 different atoms that get to be into a molecule. It's a very complex shape. DNA is incredibly complex. So we have, and all of these things would have a type of field around them, a signature field that could be detected. And we could use a process known as polography, known as voltammetry, to try to show that. Now here's some of the pictures we have. So here we are now inside the three-dimensional shape of alcornus. This is a type of homeopathic that is used and developed. It's very interesting. It uses for different types of calmative processes and etc. And here we see a type of the shape. We see this. Very interesting. Let's take a look at a different one. Here we are in a different homeopathic. And here we can see that the shape, in what we found in the polography, was a way to measure its three-dimensional shape in a matrix that now uses a 22 by 22 by 22, meaning that there is 8,000 different frequencies that go into detecting and developing and cataloging this simple shape. Can't be in a single frequency. I have height, I have width, I have breadth, I'm three-dimensional. And if you only knew one measure of me, if you just knew my height, you wouldn't know who I was if you met me in the street. If you just knew one dimension. You'd have to know at least two dimensions so that you could intuit the third. If you had a photograph, then you could intuit the third. Just if we have the equation, volts equals amps times resistance. If we only measure just resistance, we're not going to be able to understand volts and amps until we know at least two of those different parts. If we know two of those different parts, then we can go in and tell that. We can intuit the third. But I wanted to make a machine that was going to measure volts and amps and resistance, not just resistance. I wanted to measure the body electric. And then I wanted to check how the body electric reacted to these different substances. We started developing machines to be able to do that. Way back in 1985, I started using Sigma chemicals. I started using other different companies, American cell cultures. And what I did was, I bought all the different lectins, hundreds and hundreds of lectins that they had. These are natural compounds, such as Erythina crystalgali from the coral tree, which is it has an affinity for galactose and galactosides, and it is also reported to have an increase in T lymphocytes. Different chemicals that came out of nature that had effect, lectins, venoms, all the different snake venoms, all these different things, every known hormone that could be purchased, all the different venoms, hundreds of different things. And I started purchasing these back in 1985, and I had a budget of about $1,000 a month that I would be spending on these different things. I would also be accumulating different processes from all over the world. We would get the lipopolysaccharides or some of the different processes off of different bacteria, and we started collecting the different bacteria from culture and from different sources. Thousands and thousands of items. Up until now, I've spent well in excess of over $750,000 buying these items and testing them for their three-dimensional field, because then I was able to make a machine. I was able to make a machine known as the QQC. When we started doing this work, and we got some of the different spider venoms, it would take us sometimes 2 or 3 days to test one product. We had to meticulously go through challenging the different frequencies with control and finding at what spots there was absorption of the energy field and at what spots there was intensification of this. So very carefully we would set up a situation and change the frequency generator so that it would be able to detect those different things. And then it would take us to draw an 8 by 8 by 8 matrix. It might take me a couple of days to just get one remedy. But that was back in 1985. By 1989, we had developed a 12 by 12 by 12 matrix that we could get down to in one day. Then, when I got into Budapest in about 1996, we had found a way to computerize it, to be able to put a computer onto it and have the computer control the process so that it could be changing the frequencies, measuring the subtle different changes in the electrical rebound or the resonances of what happened, and be able to get us that picture. Now we can do this process in just a matter of sometimes 10, 15 minutes to be able to check a remedy, check its capacitance field, its inductance or magnetic resonance to a host of different types of energies that are going in and out, frequencies, etc. Its conductive resonance, and thereby come up with a trivector or three-dimensional field. So this simple machine, which is patented and trademarked, and absolutely secret, and you're looking at only one of 2 that exist in the entire world. This allowed us to detect and develop a complete description of those processes that helped us to really get in touch with the shape of those different homeopathics. So in our QXCI and the SCIO matrix, every item was procured, bought, paid for, exchanged, traded, bartered. Every real item was actually tested. Because we need to take another twist in our little story here. We need to talk about a simple little word called quality. We want to make the highest quality test. This is what we're testing. This is what we're going to be looking at. This is what we're going to be testing. Now, when I got into the world of energetic medicine, and I started seeing how other people tested, some people said, well, they tested 10,000 items. And I said, well, how did you get 10,000 items into your matrix? How did you test all those things? They said, well, the Entero people, Roy Curtin said he just typed in the word. He typed in the word apis mellificera. So that was all it was. The computer converted apis mellificera into ASCII word code, and it was sent into the patient. And I said, well, what if you used a word like apple, and you were testing a Japanese patient who didn't know what the word apple was? He said, well, it seems to work. There is an effect called hololinguistics, but if we're looking for quality, would there be a better process to look for quality? You see, but in alternative medicine, sometimes people don't look for quality. They don't care. They'll say, oh, you test items, done. They test items, you test items. No, quality is important. That's why people go to school. Because if somebody wants to become a painter, he'll find that the more he practices, the better his quality is. The more he learns, the more he studies. That's the whole process of reality in the real world. Quality is important. There was a man named Walter Demick who had written a book on quality control, way back in the 50s. How to make things quality. He had taken his book to United States people, and the United States people rejected him. They rejected him. They didn't like the idea of quality control. It's too much money. They didn't care about quality, much like the alternative medicine people of today. They didn't really care about things that were quality. Japan was devastated. 8 million people were killed in Tokyo alone. The only country in the entire world that's ever had an atomic bomb, and they had 2 atomic bombs dropped on them. No army, no navy. Completely devastated, but they didn't know what to do with their culture. They were trying to rebuild their culture, and they decided that before the war, there was ideas of what was made in Japan was junk. We'd say made in Japan, junk. After that, Japan decided that they wanted to make quality. They embellished and they brought quality into their system. They brought in the work of Walter Demick. They got him and they studied this and they started making quality, quality, quality. When the Japanese bought IC chips from America, sometimes there'd be 6 or 7 bad ones out of 100. And the Japanese said, that's intolerable. And the Americans would say, well, nobody else complains. It was the idea of quality. See, to the Japanese, even if there's 1 out of 1,000 that is bad, that would be something that they would want to work on. The highest award that any American can aspire to is the Congressional Medal of Honor, usually given to killing people. The highest award that any Japanese citizen can aspire to is the Walter Demick Award for quality. Quality is an issue. When it's your daughter who's sick, when it's your little son that's sick, quality becomes an issue. Quality is a very profound issue in healthcare. We want to make the systems quality. Bob Eanes, another guy who made a system work for me, and he had a system. What he would do is he would have a microphone, and the items that were tested, he would talk in vitamin C. And that word or the collection of vibrations would then go into the patient. I don't believe that is a quality. That type of process should only be last resort. I wanted to have a process of quality, detecting the trivector field in reality, not what the life systems people do, and they just have some mumbo jumbo and hololinguistic variation of a theme. All of the items that are inside our matrix are there in reality. They have been tested in their 3-dimensional field, and that 3-dimensional field is brought into the patient's process. As we started to test out all these different processes and test out all the different things, a discovery happened where I was able to see that there were certain bands of no-sode reactions, that diseased tissue had different types of energy fields than other tissues. Sarcode tissues had different types of energy bands. One of the great discoveries was that all of the miasms had spiral. Let's take a look at the spiral. Now I'm inside one of the classic miasms. classic miasm of syphilinum. It's a spiral. We found that all of the miasms had spiral. Why? It's hard to tell. We can speculate is that maybe the miasms have a time contingency. But actually it was a spiral. Very interesting. So we're able to notice different factors, and then when developing the QXCI and developing the SCIO, I was able to see how to get sarcodes as a reaction, how to get nosodes. Bacteria is different than funguses. Because the very crucial element of what you are actually doing in energetic medicine really comes down to what are you testing? And when you use any machine and you look at that process and it tells you that there is bacteria involvement, or it tells you that there is kidney involvement, how did it tell you that? It told you that by how the patient reacted to those items. How did it react to kidney? How did it react to bacteria versus how it reacted to liver or fungus? If what you are testing is not at the highest quality, if what you are testing is hololinguistic, you have to understand that percentage-wise, if the accuracy of your percentage goes down and down and down and down, then what you're going to be getting is gobbledygook. Here at Eclosion and Maitreya, we try to have the highest level of quality. In the original 510K that I had back in 1989, it described the process of the proprietary process of how we are measuring these things, how we measure these energy fields with the machine, the QQC, how we actually have done that with every item in the test kit, because every item that's there, somebody has sent us samples. They sent us all the flower essences. They sent us all the different essential oils. They sent us all these different things. We've tested them in their reality to get that into the matrix so that you can really have the finest quality, because that's our drive. I want you to have the very, very finest quality of what you're testing. And that's why we have the 22 by 22 by 22 matrix that nobody else has. And I guarantee that the Life people and those other people have not purchased all those spider venoms. They've not spent that $750,000 in all the different purchases. Because now today you can't even do that. Post 911 and they won't sell you some of those items. Way back when in 1985 I was able to buy anthrax and test it. I was able to buy the different compounds. Tuberculinum, Pseudomonas, etc., etc. All of those items in our matrix are there in reality, and we have been given samples from doctors all over the world. So when you see the Ebola virus, it was because a doctor in Africa had sent me a sample of that, a nosode sample. So by putting all these things together, and by developing the highest degree of imponderables and the highest degree of all the different remedies, etc., we're able to generate the testing. And that's why our process really does work, and why the other people who have their processes don't get the results. So I just wanted to show you a little bit about the process and the three-dimensional processes. And when you're going out to buy a system, you really need to ask the question about quality. And exactly how do they test their remedies? And when they start to do bum blum 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 blum, and they start to do mumble mouth, and they say they have their own QQC, and nobody's ever seen it or touched it, it could be a real problem. Because we have it, we've been working on it for now since 1985, and there's a reality of the development of the whole process, and many different secrets which have not been shared. So I think that you should realize what we're working with when we're working here with the different shapes.